More than 3,000 years ago, in the river valleys north, south, east, and west of the Mississippi River, several groups of early Americans began to spread out and inhabit this large region rich in fertile soil. Because of the richness of the soil in the Mississippi River Valley, there was an abundance of plants that could be harvested for food. There was also a wide variety of fruits and berries that could be gathered. In addition, there were long, winding freshwater rivers that were teeming with fish. In the beginning, the groups of people who lived in this region survived by hunting, fishing, and gathering. Then, while continuing to hunt, many of them also began to farm. As you heard earlier, farming provides groups of people with a more reliable food supply. In particular, they began to grow sunflowers and squash. Later, they grew corn and beans. Because these early peoples began to farm the land, it became necessary for them to stay close to their crops. As a result, they began to construct permanent homes and settlements. As you heard earlier, once specific groups of people began to settle in certain regions, they began to develop their own unique cultures. These Native Americans built homes, developed languages, and learned new crafts and skills. Each group did these things in their own way, and their own cultures grew out of the areas in which they lived. They also worshipped many nature gods and animal spirits, and they also created art, ornaments, and jewelry. But that is not all they created. Just as the ancient Egyptians, Maya, Aztec, and Inca built giant structures that rose up toward the heavens, so did these early native peoples of eastern Northern America. They built amazing mounds. Some of the mounds were small with rounded tops. Others were flat-topped mounds. Others rose up into the sky like pyramids. Some were burial mounds, whereas others were strictly for ceremonial purposes. There were mounds shaped like animals, too. Often the chief of the settlement, as the most important leader, had his home built on top of a mound. Today, archaeologists call this early native culture the Mississippian culture. The Adena were one of the early groups of people to build mounds. They built mounds that ranged in size from less than 20 feet to more than 300 feet in diameter. The mounds functioned as earthen burial chambers and religious ceremonial sites. The Adena inhabited a large area near the Ohio River in which are now the states of Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, and parts of Pennsylvania and New York. So this group of the mound builders had moved into some areas that were connected to the Mississippi River by the Ohio River, and some other areas that were quite a distance away from both rivers. The Adena lived in villages in circular homes with conical roofs. These Native American homes were made from poles, tree branches, mud, and bark. The Adena hunted and gathered, so they also worked together to grow sunflowers, squash, and tobacco. Increasingly, this first group of mound builders did not grow corn. However, it is believed that they smoked tobacco, probably as a ritual during important religious ceremonies and celebrations. They are known to have traded these products with other native groups. When you consider how difficult it must have been to build the mounds, it seems likely that developing a system and plan were strong aspects of cultural identity of the Adena. Building a mound required a lot of people working together, and they had to move tons of earth from one place to another with nothing more than the baskets to hold on. Why did these Native Americans build mounds? Well, just as with many ancient cultures, the reason was connected to the Adena's religious beliefs. Proper burial and honoring of their ancestors was very important to them. Most people were cremated, and when they died and placed in long placed in log tombs, which in turn were placed inside a mound. However, important members and leaders of the group were not cremated. Their bodies were placed inside the mounds with some of their personal belongings, such as beads, pipes, and flints. With each burial, more and more earth was placed on the mound. Archaeologists believe that the mounds began as smaller constructions and over many years became taller as more bodies and therefore more earth was added to them. The largest and most impressive Adena burial mound is still evident in North America, in West Virginia, and is known as Grave Creek Mound. This is a modern name for an ancient site. More than 60,000 tons of soil was moved in the construction of the mound, and it is one thought to have taken more than 100 years to complete. But perhaps the most interesting Adena construction is the curved serpent mound in Ohio, which is not a burial mound, but an effigy mound. In this case, the effigy is a mound shaped into a 1,370-foot snake. The Adena believed that the power of animal spirits, and this is one thought to have been very important religious site. It is the largest effigy earthwork in the world. Gradually, however, the Adena culture merged with other cultures to become the next group of native mound builders called the Hopewell. The Hopewell built well-constructed villages among riverbanks. They produced food by hunting and gathering nuts, seeds, fruits, and roots. By farming and by fishing, they used animal hides for clothing, mats, and homes. They made stone pipes and used copper and, like the Adena, traded with native peoples. Today, scientists believe that Hopewell sites show evidence of trade connections from Rocky Mountains to Lake Superior to North Carolina, practically across the entire continent. These sites also reveal what extraordinary artists the Hopewell were. Archaeologists know from artifacts that have survived, including decorative pottery in the shapes of animals and human beings. Hopewell mounds were even bigger than the Adena mounds. It's possible that these mounds were used not only for burial purposes, but also as ceremonial temples, and perhaps even for defense purposes, in addition to providing high ground in times of flooding. With Hopewell settlements, tribal and regional religious leaders would have had a significant amount of power. Hopewell had rules, just as all societies do, designed to help large groups of people live in one place. Referrals and Hopewell had rules, just as all societies do, designed to help large groups of people live in one place. Chiefs and religious leaders were often responsible for enforcing these rules. The final prehistoric culture group of North American mound builders was the Mississippian culture. This was perhaps the most developed mound culture of all. They were a people who relied upon corn as their most important food crop. They lived in large towns, sometimes referred to as city-states. They were populated by hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The largest Mississippian town was Cahokia in Missouri. Within each Mississippian town there were several mounds, but the most important mound was a flat-topped mound upon which sat the religious temple or a ruler's home. The flat-topped mound was usually constructed in a central plaza. Mississippian mounds were several stories high and were symbols of the people's religious beliefs. The craftspeople, artists, and builders. The Mississippians worshiped the sun and their ancestors. They were expert craftspeople, artists, and builders. The people were governed by powerful leaders and priests, and their religious beliefs touched every aspect of their lives. When Europeans came to North America, they encountered the Mississippian people. The largest mound in this town was one of the mounds still in existence today and is known as Monk's Mound. It covers an area of 16 acres. It is larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Over a very long period of time, thousands of mounds were constructed by these three distinct groups of people: the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippians. This Mississippian mound is in Georgia. None of the names mentioned here are native names. We do not know what these people called their mounds, or even what they called themselves. Ironically, it is the mounds that provide us with a window into the past. After thousands of years, the mounds and the artifacts that have been discovered in and around them speak to us of a time when, long ago, before Europeans came to this continent, they speak of a time when native peoples worshipped many groups of nature gods and lived out their lives freely on this land.